Avast ye scallywags. This is Hyperborean Radio. Ready your sea legs as we weigh anchor, sailing in the wasteland of modernity. This is the Dread Pirate McThunder, letting you know you are not alone. I'm joining today Celtic God and the Lorekeeper.
Hey everybody, how you guys doing? As McThunder said, or the Dread Pirate McThunder, we're here with the Lorekeeper, who's sitting over here shaking his head, and we're communicating via a brick, I believe is how you're calling into us today. Is this correct?
Absolutely. So, brick is like an old nautical jargon. So, back in the old days, back when modern radio came into play, like not in the old days, but it's just a slang for like a heavy radio used in bridge-to-bridge communication and whatnot.
So, like once we hit like the electronic period where there's radios, it's like actually the first cell phones that came out, people would refer to those as bricks as well because it was big and bulky and kind of brick shaped
and nigh indestructible
heavy.
You know, like the modern phones, they drop and it's like shattering into pieces, whereas you know, the old phones, I mean, you could throw it at a wall and it would just be like, sup.
Yeah, they don't make them like they used to, so yeah, absolutely.
Right.
They just called them brick also because they were so heavy, really big. Right. I couldn't even wrap my hand around the entire thing when I used one.
So our purposes today, really, is one, to let people know that they aren't alone out there in the wasteland of modernity. But we're going to talk about, you run a telegram, which is called, what is it called?
It's called GeeDunk Nautica.
Uh-oh, I hear the Raiders flying over.
Oh, yeah. Better take cover.
We're in trouble. They got the planes now. That's all right. We can get them.
It's just an old term. It's been around a while. So, GeeDunk, it's an old Navy term. It's been around for a while. So, it's and the reason I use that name for the telegram is because it's very comparable to like a fest house or a great hall. So GeeDunk on a ship, both on and off a ship, it's a place where people come together, or crew members come together, and they break bread with one another. They sit down at the table and meet and talk about the day.
So it's like the dining hall or the I guess just gathering area of a ship is called a GeeDunk.
Yeah, not only that, but it's also it can be anywhere, like a coffee station or like a vending machine, that kind of thing. Just anywhere people can congregate, get together, that kind of thing.
Everybody's favorite place.
One another. I'm sorry?
I said everybody's favorite place. So like in an office building, it would be the water cooler?
Yeah, absolutely. Just some informal place to sit down and talk frankly with one another, if you will.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that if I look up schematics of a ship, I'm not going to see a space labeled the GeeDunk. That's just it's probably different on every ship.
Yeah, most definitely, because that's an endearing term used by the crew. It's not. I wouldn't think that it'd actually be written in stone somewhere where this is where the GeeDunk is. It's wherever the crew decides it's going to be. It could be on the rear of the ship where the crew sits down and has a sandwich, or shares a soda. Just anywhere where you can sit down and talk. Or shoot dice, or relax a little bit,
or tell stories. Because I think that's on your telegram of GeeDunk. You actually talk about folklore and things of that nature, predominantly from sea and water lore. And the GeeDunk would have been where a lot of those tales get passed down. Davy Jones, Dread Pirates, the Flying Dutchman, Poseidon, Neptune, all these sorts of water deities and spirits and folklore.
Absolutely. So, like you were saying, deities, the legendary sea captains, like monstrous creatures, such as the Kraken, or just mermaids. Let's see. Yeah,
Well,
just
I
sharing
know-
stories.
Go ahead, continue.
I was gonna say sharing stories of legend and also tales from home. These are places where they would, sailors or mariners of the same region would come together and reminisce of things they miss about home.
Would you say that this is most of what your Telegram channel is revolved around, is where you share nautical stories and maybe some stories from land and how it applies to the sea and stuff like that, or are you taking a slightly different course with it?
No, just trying to, absolutely share our story at sea. The European and diasporan story of like our life at sea, our braving, the dangers of the sea. And there's so much info out there. It's a recent Telegram channel, and I've only just begun to tap into the untold. I mean, it's just so much to tell. I've got a stack, a digital stack that of things I want to get into and relay to our people. But it's massive.
And that's GeeDunk Nautica?
Yes, GeeDunk. So, funny thing about that,
And we will
name-
post a link to it in this show for YouTube. This family-friendly version of the show. We'll post a link of it in the description so that you can find it. And if you like his Telegram, go ahead and join up. Because currently right now, I believe, you've been doing this for a little while, but currently right now, I believe that you're still below 100 followers on there.
Yeah, right around, I think it's around 54 at the moment. So,
Which would be great. Hopefully we can get you up to 100.
join the Centennial Club. So,
Yes. Woo! I mean,
So-
really, and I've seen some, because I do follow you on there, and actually, to be honest, I've seen all your posts. But I've seen on there, like, I figured, it's going to be just things on nautical gods, which you have stuff on there. But you have other deities in there, as well as notable sailors.
And customs and folk heroes. Like you had one on a cat as well. I forget what he was called.
Unsinkable Sam. So that's what his name was. So it's kind of interesting. I was looking at animals of the sea. So tying in what kind of creatures are associated with like seafarers and that thing. And I came across a story of Unsinkable Sam. So back, I think probably around the time of World War II, actually probably beyond then, sailors used to carry cats on board ships, and there's a reason for that, because ships like to eat mice. And what mice and rats would do was come from the pier side and get on board a ship using the mooring line. So that ship that's tied up to a pier, they would run up the ropes, and then they would cause all sorts of problems, like getting into the food stores. They would
Water.
cause disease, that sort of thing. So cats were brought on board to kind of fight back against that.
Nothing worse than
And,
opening up a cask of water and there's like a dozen floating mice in there.
Oh, yeah. And that was carried on up until, I think, World War II, maybe a little bit after. But Unsinkable Sam was an interesting story because he was actually on 3 different ships, and those ships were sunk during the wars. And
Really?
he made it through every single time, so he was seen kind of as a good luck charm. So
I don't know. Would that be good luck or would that be bad luck? He was on 3 ships that sunk.
That was my thought of exactly was, wait. The common denominator of all these sunk ships is the cat. How do we know the cat's not doing it?
Double agent.
Yeah, like everybody's all nice and good, and then the cat gets up on the panel and he pushes the button. He's like, "For Mother Russia, it's here."
I did it again.
I mean, I know.
And it was pretty neat. I was gonna say it's pretty neat to see that they have some photos of him because he was around during the times when photo technology was available.
Uh-huh.
But the crew actually made a little mini hammock for him. Like he had his own little space. He was like part of the crew, so he had his own little mini hammock. It looked like it was only a foot long. So.
Well, I'd have to say it probably also has a psychological impact on the sailors as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a reason sea mariners are kind of a superstitious lot, you know.
Well, and for the people that don't care about the sea, well, shame on you. But I myself am not a big fan of the ocean, but I can definitely respect it, and I like to know about it. Because I will never actually go out on the ocean.
Too many sharks.
Various issues. But anyways, the idea of a mascot, it was actually common through most of our militaries. We recently did articles on Wojciech. There's companies that had pigs, military companies that had pigs as mascots, or
dogs.
Dogs are really common. Horses are another very common one. I read one about where they had a pet chicken. And it's crazy, but yeah, the connection, having some kind of animal to be able to connect to during these times, it's actually psychologically valuable.
And not to mention also like figurehead masks. So I know the token one everybody knows is probably the mermaid at the front of a ship, like back in the days of sail.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you have dragons and like different, like Poseidon for the Greeks, or I mean not the Greeks, yeah, but different sea gods, mounted on the front of a ship. There was, I don't know if they were seen as good luck, but I know they definitely are beautiful.
Well, I think part of it is they were probably protective because, like, I know everybody calls like the ones on the Viking ships, they call them dragons. Well, considering that they took them off when they hit land, I really actually suspect it had more to do with Jormungandr. Because if your spirituality says there's a giant snake god in the ocean...
Well, and bear in mind, too, that dragon used to just mean monster.
Yes. So having this serpent, basically, as your mast while you're traveling over a giant serpent.
Well, is that a mast or is it a prow? I'm unsure about the
I am a land
A mast,
lover,
I think, is the upright stick thing with the sail. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. So that's the main, like one of the main poles that goes up in the center of the ship that propels the ship. At least in the days of sail.
Okay, but what the Lorekeeper was just talking about was the prow. Right? That's the front?
The brow or the prow?
Prow. I have an accent and a thick mustache.
The prow. So, I'm gonna have to look up that one and get back to you. Not saying he's incorrect. I just
a nautical person that is not all up and up on all the terms. I suppose that you call it left side, right side of the ship as opposed to port and starboard.
Oh, okay. So there we're getting into something different. So so you have your left side of if you're looking at the front of the ship, the left side is called the port side, and then you have the right side, which is starboard. So the front of the ship is excuse me. The front of the ship is the
prow.
No, the forecastle. The name for it is it's a shortened term for it is it's forecastle, but it's spelled forecastle. Fore.
Oh yeah, the forecastle. Yes, I've read that term before, and I'm like, Is that the front or the back? Because in the old literature that I've read, they just called it the forecastle. So I learned another thing new.
Can you give a guess to what the rear of the ship is called?
The rear.
Yes, but also it's called the fantail.
Is that due to the steering mechanism?
I couldn't tell you that either, but that's just what it's called.
Huh. Well, see, now I'm raising up questions for you to answer on your Telegram. You can look these
Absolutely.
up and be like, that's interesting. Why do they call it this? Why do they call it that? Where did this name come from? Like, I recently read an article. I don't know if it was from you or somebody else, but they was talking about port side and starboard, and that the port side wasn't always called port side. It was something else, but the name of it was very close to starboard in the way that they used to say it. So then they actually changed it to port side because the port, when they pull up to the dock, the port is actually on that side, which makes sense, I guess. And why is it always on the left? Because that way they don't have ships, I'm guessing, going head to head trying to get out of port. I mean, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's actually, I just published something on that a couple days ago. So the reason it was called that is back in the old days, ships, they used to the sailors using the right side at the rear of the ship with the steering with the steering oar, and they would use their right hand, which means it was slightly off to the right, and so that's
to
two English. Yeah.
Basically, it just made it easier to line up so that you didn't smash into it or get too far away.
Yeah, and most people are right-handed, so it just kind of makes it that way.
Yes, most people are backwards. I understand.
So it's a combination of two English words, steer, which means steer, and board, which means the side of the boat. So
the steering side of the ship.
Yes, and the opposite side was known as larboard, or the loading side.
Okay,
So,
I recognize this. It must have been yours that I read.
Yeah.
Which is, it's cool. I was like, man, now he needs to do one on the other parts of the ship.
Well, that's one thing I like about your posts is you just similar to how we do it. We don't just do folklore. We also do history and culture and sort of the whys of certain things. Mm-hmm. And you do the same thing. Like I've seen posts on GeeDunk about the sailor tattoos. I've seen them on like differing customs. One of my favorites is one,
but it still all revolves around the nautical traditions, which is excellent. You don't overly specialize. Yeah, you don't overly specialize.
Well, one of my favorites, and I think there's even a picture in the slideshow right now, is the crossing of the equator ceremony that includes the court of Neptune.
Oh yeah, I remember asking him about that when we first met. It's like, do they still do that? Is this really a thing?
Oh, absolutely, they do. And I've actually experienced this. So it's utilized all across the board. It's not just military vessels, but as well as civilian vessels as well, or commercial vessels. So they do. Everybody does their own rendition of it, but it involves going through a set of trials, to put it mildly, and then once you cross the equator, in my instance, I crossed the equator and the international date line. And once you cross those 2 points, you have a crossing of the line ceremony. And I can't tell you much about it because I've sworn to secrecy to His Majesty King Neptune.
Ah.
But what I can tell you is I got to meet him, and he made fun of me.
I wonder if it's the same thing. And I read about it, so I don't see it happening on modern ships, modern mechanized ships, but I can definitely see how they would have done it in the day of the sailboats. But I did read a couple of the customs. Like one was they would tie the first time crossing the equator, they would tie the feet of the sailor together and drag them across the equator in the water. They would stop so far or they would basically throw him overboard so far from the equator, and then drag him across the equator, and then fish him back up, and then they would do the ceremony.
Well, wow.
I couldn't see that happening on modern vessels. I could see somebody just getting chewed up by a propeller.
I think that people would just straight up die with especially with how big
we just chummed the water. Where did that come from?
Yeah, I don't think that would end well. So I think they probably had to figure some other stuff out. But again, sworn to secrecy.
Right.
But I love little things like that because most people don't know about them. And a lot of them will actually include other nautical figures, like Davy Jones is one that will show up when I've looked at the folklore and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's these little things. And one thing that me and CG were talking, and one thing I found very interesting, and there's all these priests that apparently historically have tried to get them to stop doing these very obvious pagan ceremonies on sailing vessels.
On occasion, priests fall overboard or just come up missing. They don't know where he went.
Suspiciously around the same time as the equator crossing. Yes.
At first, I thought you were going to bring up keel hauling when you mentioned dropping a crew member in the water, but that's something completely different.
Yeah, that's completely different.
Oh, and
that's where they basically run them underneath the ship, correct? Like
yes, that's called sailor justice. So if you had a crew member that was committed a crime against the crew or against the fleet, what they would do is you have the main mast and the ends of the perpendicular bottom log attached to the mast that would straighten the sail. They would attach ropes to each end of that, and they would hang a crew member by his feet or his hands by one side of it, attach weights to his ankle, run the line under the ship somehow, I don't know how, and attach it to the other side. So what they would do is pull him under the ship and up the other side, and just repeat as often as they felt. Sometimes they died, sometimes they wouldn't.
So you're saying that this old song, which I've seen make it every now and then, it makes its rounds around the internet of, what do you do with a drunken sailor?
What do you do with a drunken sailor? What do you do?
Are you saying that the song might possibly be based on real actions of sailors?
I mean, isn't it like it's a bunch of?
Well, historically, it is.
It is
because I looked at some of the punishments, and it might not necessarily have to do with the drunken sailor, but usually it's like you said, somebody that's treasonous to the crew or the fleet, or somebody just not pulling their own weight. Put them in a longboat until they're sober. Historically, I've read accounts where, as a punishment, they would put somebody in one of the longboats attached to the ship, and then they put them in there by themselves, and then drag them behind the ship all day and all night, and then bring them back on the next day, and that was his punishment. Which might not sound that vicious, but you've been on the ocean. I'm not going to say what your profession is, but you've been on the ocean before, and I'm sure that you can figure that you know better than I do. That would be a severe punishment.
Yes, sure. Especially open water sailing. I've been on ships that are made out of aluminum. They even have modern ships that are made out of aluminum, and that's a lighter. It's metal, but it's lighter. I can only on one of those ships for 4 days, and this ship was about 300 feet long and I think about 80 feet wide, and we were on open water, and I was just getting tossed around the entire 4 days. So I can only imagine being in open water on a little little boat.
Yeah, basically
a little rowing boat. Yeah, a little rowboat. I can only imagine. Oh.
Well, and that's...
and then with no food, no water, no shelter.
Yeah, you'd basically become a tanned hide. I mean...
because there's no shelter. You're just out there getting tossed about.
With
hold on for dear life. Yeah.
And the salty sea air.
And then another one of the lines in that song is, shave his belly with a rusty razor. from what I understand, shaving the belly with a rusty razor, which is pretty much the ultimate punishment because it's lethal. It's guaranteed lethal because they split your belly with a straight razor.
Ooh.
Which is
Yes,
why the song ends with that. Is that a chorus?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a chorus, but it's
or verse. That's why the song ends with that verse, is because now your drunken sailor is dead because you've shaved his belly or split his belly with a knife.
Oh, and another one in the song is tie him to the topsail till he's sober.
Hang him from the high tower till he's sober. What is the high tower?
High tower. I would think that'd probably be close up there with the crow's nest, or like way up high.
Maybe like that thing that you was telling me about with the where they would hang them from the yardarm, I think it is, the thing that the sail is on, and then a sudden gust of wind come up and hit them, and they might actually get ripped apart by the pressure of the sail.
Oh, jeez.
I mean,
forgive me if I can't remember. If I did say it, cool. I don't
stories are my forte. Names, not so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember talking to you, and you was looking some stuff up, and you're like, "Oh man, this is just brutal." But and why were the sailors so brutal? Why are they actually still relatively brutal? It's because you kind of have to be.
Well, and it's something that I think is important to bring up is these careers.
It's not brutality for brutality's sake.
Yeah, it's because when you're up against nature, which you are on the sea, you don't have the luxury of modern niceties. And this is also why a lot of people will bring up the witches and stuff and point out the continuation of paganism there, but the continuation of Hyperborean ethnic faith, it continued with the men as well, but it was in like hunting ceremonies, farming traditions, military traditions, naval traditions, and seafaring traditions. Like I think the official naval song even references Davy Jones, who is effectively a modern sea deity. I mean, I know he's popularized in sort of the Lovecraftian way he's depicted in Pirates of the Caribbean. But like the actual lore is he could basically, I think, shapeshift into any sea creature he wanted. I mean, if he took a human form, he favored like a pirate or a fisherman. But it's a whole thing, and it's... People ignore these things, and I think that that's to the detriment of realizing just how long this stuff has been going on. Like Fiddler's Green or Davy Jones' Locker. These are like meadows of the ancestors, halls of deities. So, but you were going to say something, so go ahead, McThunder.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say like Davy Jones's references have been made to actual sightings of the Flying Dutchman by ships logs that have been found over the years. Back in the 1700s, 1800s, so it's whether or not people believe there were actual sightings or just the person on watch had just been up too long or what have you. I'm going to take it as real because it's an official document. There's a reason there's a reason ships have logbooks, and one of the reasons is it's served as a legal document in case of the ship or the company that the crew sails for comes up in like lawsuits or that kind of thing. They can.
Yeah, because I was going to suggest to you start looking into some of the ghost ships. We still actually occasionally get ghost ships even in the modern day, where you have the ship, it's floating, there's nobody on board, nothing really wrong with the ship except for just damage from wind and water, but. It's not busted up. There's no reason for the crew to not be there. And sometimes there's even still food and water on board. Where did the crew go? And these are ghost ships. They're, like you said, it comes from official documents, the stuff that I looked at, which is like the ship's records or naval records, etc., etc. And I didn't even look at the folklore of it. I was just looking at the legal documents of it. And sometimes, apparently, they even come up and what's that called? Beach. They beach on the shore, and there's who was on it. What happened? Why is there nobody on board? So you might really like digging into that. I don't know. There was one recently that was reported by, I believe it was the Navy. But yeah, it was an old sailing vessel. It wasn't like it wasn't ancient, but it also wasn't like the modern ships either. Apparently, it was a sailing vessel, but it didn't go into description exactly of how old it was. Of course, my mind immediately went to, the pirate. So something akin to like the Flying Dutchman. But yeah,
right.
these things, they're very real. And for the people in the audience, you should remember the kraken or the giant squid was poo-pooed on science right up until about 10 years ago?
And then they found one. I mean,
They photographed one.
Yeah, it's not as big as some people would say, but there's no guarantee that that's the biggest they can be.
Right.
I mean, here's the thing is, the simple fact is, we don't even know if, everyone poo-poos on the idea of sea serpents, and I've never actually understood why. Where's the rule that, there couldn't be a serpent somewhere in the ocean that's as big as a whale? Maybe not as, fat, but...
Or why not? 3 times the size of a whale. I mean, the ocean's pretty big. Last time I checked, it's pretty deep and it's pretty vast.
Yeah, it's...
Here's a question for the sailor guy. What does a vast mean? Like a vasty, whatever.
A vasty? Let's see if I can dig that up out of my memory. So, a vasty means get ready, I think. Or, pretty much get ready. Steel yourselves. A vasty, stand your ground. It can mean so it can mean a number of things, but it's an endearing term. I don't think it's used much nowadays, but back in days of canvas sail, yeah, most definitely. Get ready to defend yourself. A vasty,
And ahoy, I think it was, maybe it was you, but again, I read something recently where it was discussing ahoy, and then I know that we had a brief conversation about it, but ahoy, do you know where that actually comes from? I know how it's used. I mean, I'm pretty sure most people knows how it's used.
Everybody knows that ahoy comes from Chips Ahoy.
Yes, that's it. All the questions are now solved.
All I can remember off the top of my head is ahoy means spotted. Land ahoy. I see land there. Or ahoy there. I see you.
Land ho.
Yeah. So, the origins of it, I'd have to dig into that as well. But that's essentially what it means.
Oh, so everybody needs to join your GeeDunk Nautica Telegram now, so that they can see all these answers unfold in front of them without having to scroll up 400 miles. Because right now you actually have a very impressive amount of information on there. I think people could read for a couple days with everything that you have in there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's the in pile is quite mountainous at this point, so it's going to keep coming. Good material, and there's so much there that I will probably in my lifetime never get to the end of it. So I'm kind of having to pick and choose what I research and what I put out there for our guys, for our people to read and to understand. There's a ton of sea lore where people that have gone out to sea, adventurers, explorers,
Well, when you first started, did you realize just how big the topic was, or did you think, this might keep me busy for a while, but I'm going to run out of stuff?
I think it was the second part. Yeah, I thought that this was just going to be, a small little hobby thing, I'll just every once in a while, because I was figuring all that was out there. What was is what we see today. You know, Davy Jones. You know, that kind of thing. You know, just the more well-known myths and legends and people. There's so much out there. So much. It's so much that I kind of have to now kind of pick and choose, you know, which of these tales that I actually want to tell.
Right. So it's kind of like the Lorekeeper says all the time, and so many storytellers really is the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and you end up having to, it's like a Sophie's Choice moment. It's like, what would you rather study? Because, like, right now, I'm studying things like Midsummer, witches, cornucopias, and stuff like that. And it's because whatever I choose to study, there's always, like, 10 other things on the docket just in the back of my mind that I'd also want to be studying. So it's a whole thing. And that's across the lore for our people. But even just within sea lore, you have different ethnic group stories. There's different creatures that have different stories. So on and so forth. You aren't going to learn all this in an afternoon. And I think that's...
absolutely not.
And I think that's one thing that I think always surprises people when they actually start digging into any subsection of our lore. Even like the post-pagan sort of pseudo-Christian lore that a lot of people bring up, like Charlemagne, or like things named after the devil and all these things, and it always ends up like it's covering something up or it's an extension of something older, is people never realize how much there is out there, especially because unless you know exactly what you're looking for, a lot of times it's hard to find it. And then when you find that thing, there's then like 10 other things. You know, it's like in a video game. You know, you start out and you have you know, like you can hit, you can jump. But eventually it's just like a plethora of options. And each one has like a bunch of other things you can do, and so on and so forth. And it just keeps going.
Well, it's like going through that like a maze, basically, where a maze is a maze. You just walk through the maze and then you come out the other side. But inside this maze are doors and corridors and stairs up and down. And just when you think that you get to the end of one, there's more. And you could end up basically exploring it for the rest of your life. And yeah, I'm aware of how big the nautical lore is, because my major course of study, mostly what I looked at was military histories, and I dug through naval battles for a couple years and barely stuck my foot in the water. It is a lot of information out there, a lot of tradition. We have been with the sea for a very, very long time.
We're semi-aquatic effectively as a people, whether that's lakes, rivers, coastlines, or the seafarers among us.
So yeah, we and just like just as seafaring people, we also have to come back to shore. So that's another thing I'm delving into is land lore. You know, I know that's your specialty, so I'll leave the intricacies of that up to you. But also attached to GeeDunk Nautica is Euro-Pagan Discovery Channel. So that's another Telegram channel that's associated with GeeDunk Nautica. But the two sometimes kind of tie into each other, you know. For instance, mind your P's and Q's. Does anybody know where that comes from?
Honestly, I have no idea. I used to know, but I forgot.
So, sailors in port towns used to frequent the local taverns. You know, long months of sail. What do I want to do? Sit down for a drink. So one of the things they would do is go into the tavern. Night of celebrations, let them loose. But the tavern keep would have a chalkboard behind the bar there, and he would keep a tally of each person that had their drinks. You know, you're having a pint of ale. Here's a mark for you. You know, And so that was a common saying at the end of the night when the tavern was closing down. Mind your P's and Q's, pay your tab. So that's where that kind of originates.
Well, that's like the term hangover. That originated because inns weren't like people think of them from the movies or role-playing games, etc., etc. Well, were there some like that? Well, without a doubt, there was some that was similar. But most, basically, is just a bar house. They might have a couple beds stashed in the corners here or there, but often they would run lines out back, much like clotheslines. And then the patrons who are too drunk to go home don't want to lay in the mud, pay a penny, and they literally hang over the rope. They was hung over.
Wow. So first I've heard of that. That's
it's one of those interesting little tidbits that you come across when you're not looking for it. That's actually where most of the most interesting things I think come from. Is you might be looking into I don't know, the origins of P's and Q's, and then you trip over hangovers, and then that references, I don't know, maybe gangplanks, which then turns around and talks about Ron, one of the
Ran
deities.
or Ron, depends on who you ask.
One of the, I believe it's Norwegian, right?
Scandinavian.
We'll just round it off as Scandinavian sea deities. So then usually where you find the most interesting things, you wasn't even looking for it.
Well, and not just like every other lore, they bleed into each other. Like a name for a illusion island, you know, like one that you can see but you can't really see, was a Fata Morgana, you know, a fairy island of Morgan Le Fay. And she's not really technically a sea deity. I mean, I think her name does translate to something to do with water in the Welsh language, but that's another example. And it's one thing that people often forget is that these things bleed over. You know, there's a lot of things that used to be exclusively part of, like, the more maritime cultures that has made its way into modern culture. Like, one big thing that's been happening is there's a rise in the popularity of sea shanties. And that's sort of becoming a bit more commonplace in some parts of the culture. But on the same token, things from, you know, the landlubbers end up going out with the seafarers. And there's actually it's sort of like how I am definitely not someone that would probably do well on the sea. There's other people that really don't do well on land, and there's actually folklore of a rather famous able-bodied sailor, Stormalong, in American folklore. And there's just a ton of stuff with Stormalong. I mean, he ends up, you know, with Davy Jones in his stories. He ends up making the White Cliffs of Dover. And there's even a story where he tries to go farming, but he hates it so much that he comes back and he's like, yeah, I hated it. Let's go back out to sea.
Screw you and your plows.
And the guy was massive, too. So the stories tell if he was either 20 or 30 feet tall. He's essentially, at least in my opinion, he's the Paul Bunyan of the seas. You know, Paul Bunyan was a massive man that, you know, the demigod of, or the god, depending on who you ask, of the lumberjacks. Old Stormalong filled that same role, except for sailors and mariners. And
even to downplay him, basically he'd be like a titan of the sea.
Well, I mean, the dude's sworn enemy was the Kraken. He wasn't a pushover.
Yeah, isn't there a couple stories where he dove into the sea?
Yeah, he dove in with a knife, and like he would beat the Kraken by like tying its tentacles or something. And he had just a massive, massive ship. I forget what it was called. And there's a bunch of different stories as to how Alfred Bulltop Stormalong, or Able-Bodied Sailor, ABS, ended up meeting his end. Sometimes he doesn't even die. What happened was there was a huge gust of wind, and his absolutely gigantic island-sized ship ends up flying in the clouds. So he's still sailing out there, just in the clouds.
Away he goes.
Others, he ended up in Davy Jones' locker. I mean, it's there's so much lore out there just on Stormalong alone, and it's like a treasure hunt, because some of it's over there, some of it's over here. You know?
Right, because really you're not going to get a book just on Stormalong. I mean, we're hoping eventually we can cure a lot of this, where you're not really going to get the full book on Stormalong. But you find Stormalong here, and you find Stormalong over there, and you find
Well,
Stormalong.
it's sort of like what I'm doing. I'm writing, articles bit by bit on German lore. My goal is to eventually have enough that I can sort of take that information, make a book out of it. Because I've had people ask...
And there's so much you'll never get a definitive book.
No, but I can do an intro, because a lot of the deities get looked over, or they get fused with Norse deities. Like, one really common one is Frigg Holda. People will call Hala or Holda the same as Frigg. And I actually found where that originated, where people got that. Mm-hmm. It was a not a mistranslation. So in handwritten texts, F and S's used to be used interchangeably.
Right.
And what it was there was striga, or a derivative of that word, which is a word for witch.
Uh-huh.
And they wrote it with the S that looks like an F. So it reads like Friga Holda with it, and then people took that and made it think that they were the same deity.
The witch Holda.
Yeah, the witch Holda. But they read it as Frigg Holda, and people just ran off with it because it's like and I'm very adamant in saying that cults of gods spread further or less than people actually think they did.
Oddly, both things are true at the same time.
Yeah, well, Odin's cult that's really prominent nowadays is a fairly recent result. Odin as Odin was not nearly as popular, and he was really not an everybody deity. He was very much an elite deity.
Right. But before we pound on...
Oh, yeah, I don't want to get too far. I'm going back over to sea lore. But one big thing I've noticed is, while you have, Manan and Meklir, all these other deities of the sea, there is a head honcho, for better or worse, and that is Neptune. King Neptune is...
Even though that Neptune wasn't necessarily in all of the old... Pantheons isn't even the right word. But now... Everybody knows who Neptune is. Not everybody knows who Ron is.
Well, and people don't even realize that ocean itself is named after Oceanus, the titan of the... Not even of the sea. That's the interesting thing.
I'm sorry. I did not mean to imply to people that I have read a thing or two.
But Oceanus was actually the deity of supposedly the river that encircled the world. Mm-hmm. Now we have the ocean, and that's where he dwells. But of course... Neptune got carried over, and instead of just ruling over the Mediterranean Sea, he now because now people realize the ocean is bigger than the
right. Well,
Mediterranean
and it seems
Sea.
too that there's a bit of a battle now between Poseidon and Neptune, and the consensus that people are making is, well, Poseidon and Neptune are the same, but no, they're not.
Well, and this is the thing that's kind of weird. This is my opinion. What people are saying is that they want Poseidon, because that's what all the imagery is from, is what was transposed by the elites on top of Neptune. However, everyone uses the name Neptune, but they're using it to refer to Poseidon.
Which is just, it's crazy. And something, we was talking about it yesterday when we tried to connect, but bricks were falling all over the place and we couldn't keep a connection to do this. Is it Flemish? The Flemish pirate?
Phrygian.
Phrygian? The big giant dude with the massive sword.
Oh, Big Pier.
Yes, that's it, Big Pierre.
So the things I've seen on him, the stories I've seen on him, he's actually like closer to 7 foot tall. Massive man, and had a sword to match, because the stories mentioned that he had a sword as big as he was. And he was just I don't know about you, but if I saw someone that stature coming at me with a sword as big as he was, I'd probably
trip you and run.
So
offer him a beer and hope that he just said, hey, that sounds good. But yeah, that's just massive. And I've read a little bit of them because it does fall under the military history. And It's an intriguing story. It's also a heartbreaking story, but it's also a yeah kind of story. But the guy's size varies wildly in the accounts that I've read, where he could have been anything from 6'9" is the shortest that I've heard him described as, all the way to a little bit over 8 feet tall. Either way,
Oh wow.
massive dude. Well, and here's the thing: like I'm 5'8", 6'9" is big. From my perspective, there is very little difference between 6'9" and 8 feet. Because either way, they're remarkably taller than I am. And the thing is, like a lot of people, they might picture this tall guy, but then they end up making him skinny. Mr. Pierre, because that's the way it's spelt, so that's the way I say it. I might be mispronouncing it, but he was not tall and skinny. He was tall and broad, much like our strongmen today.
Like Hafthor Bjornsson.
Yeah, like Hafthor, or I don't really like him, but Brian Shaw is one I do like. It'd be like taking Brian Shaw, blow air into him to make him a little bit taller and equally as broad as he currently is, and then give him a sword the same size as him. Yeah. It's insane, because Brian Shaw is 6'9".
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, he's 6'9". He's give or take 400 pounds. A massive wall of man with a sword to match. Holy crap! And being pissed off, being very angry. Sorry, I'm trying to train myself to be more family friendly. But the beginning part of this guy's story is just utterly horrifying, and I understand why. Basically, he went to war. He went to war.
Yeah, in the tales, the local authorities, his wife and children, I believe, both were, or it might just have been his wife, but she
From
was.
What I understand, it was his wife and children, pretty consistently across the stories I've read. Anyways, what?
Okay, I was just gonna say that she was killed. I think it was by local mercenaries or local foot soldiers of whichever powers was in.
Yeah, I've read it was opposing forces, local mercenaries, local guards. I've read the full spectrum, but it's pretty consistent. It was authority figures of some kind ended up killing his wife and children.
Yeah, so he essentially just got fed up with it and just got took up his sword and just like led an onslaught against the powers that be. I mean, took over ships. I think it was under 20 ships he took, and just led land battles. Massive dude, impressive story too.
Well, and that's a pretty common thing with a lot of individuals that enter into sea legend. Basically, you got like Anne Bonny, a ton of the Viking heroes. Like I think Harold the Black Harold Finehair, I think is his name. Is he the one that basically like decided, I'm going to take over all of Scandinavia so I can get this woman to marry me?
Oh, I can't remember his name now. Yeah, I think it's Finehair, something like that. The guy that wasn't going to brush his hair until brush or cut his hair until he became king of all of Scandinavia. That guy.
Yeah.
Anyways, I can't remember what his name was. I think it was Harold Finehair. I think.
Well, and then there's...
if somebody knows, let us know in the comments if you know who that is off the top of your head.
And Bonnie, Blackbeard, Barbarossa.
Right, and with most of these figures, too, there's... I wouldn't say that there's contradictory information in their stories, but let's roll with variety. Because Blackbeard, for instance, right? He's described in many different ways, but always with the Blackbeard a little bit nuts. Sometimes he was arrested and executed. Sometimes he went down on a ship. Sometimes he retired and became effectively a land baron. Sometimes he retired to a farm and then that was it. Sometimes he retired to a farm here in America and then joined the Senate. And which senator was Blackbeard? There's a lot of variation on it, and really I think that's part of what makes our stories so great is the stories are relatively consistent, but there's variation.
Well, and it allows you to have that mythic end. You know, they didn't die. This might have happened, or this might have happened. Well, and with Blackbeard, I mean, I think he dyed his beard.
It's even in contention. Did Blackbeard even actually exist?
Or is he a composite? That's another one.
I've read that his real name is Edward Teak, or Teach. Edward Teak. So, whether he was real or not, I think he was based off a real life person. Whether the tales reflect that or not, I don't know.
Well, in Blackbeard...
Well, in any good story, like if we was to go out onto the high seas I would go onto, all three of us, we go out onto the Great Lakes, and we have a grand fishing adventure. And I do something remarkably stupid, but brave and courageous, and you just like telling the story. Do you tell the story? The first couple times you might tell the story exactly as it happened. And then you build onto it. And then somebody else likes the story, so they tell the story. And they imagine it slightly different from how you describe it. And it gets added onto and subtracted from. And sometimes the stories are so big that nobody believes them, period.
Yeah, the tall tales, the big fish stories.
Right. Well, and like, who would believe, once they understand how heavy things are, who would believe that somebody deadlifted a full half-ton of weight? If you couldn't look it up on YouTube, would you actually believe that? That story is bigger than life.
Well, and it's one of our people. We have a lot of hold by beer moments. Well, and these sorts of things that we're talking about today, they have further impacts on culture than people give them credit for. Like Blackbeard, he's everywhere. I mean, I think he's like the main villain over in, not a Western media, but in Japan. He's like the main villain, or one of the main villains, in the most popular manga.
Well, and that's also one of the great things I love about our stories is when we have these heroes, were they heroes or were they villains? The simple answer is yes.
Well, everybody's a villain to somebody, everybody's a hero to somebody, even if it's just in their own head. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people don't realize is a lot of our heroes would, by modern standards, be villains. Like Heracles, for instance. I mean, the dude straight up kills a lot of people. I mean, he would have been arrested for basically serial killing at this point.
Or would it be serial killing?
Or it would just be...
Mass murdering happens all at once, so it'd be serial killing.
Oh, I think it would be both, because he's done both.
Right.
And that's another thing is... This is one of my pet peeves, and this doesn't necessarily... This applies to naval gods, too. Everybody thinking that the gods would obey the rules in the modern day are fooling themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about trickster deities like Odin, Loki, Mercury, Lugh. I'm talking about, like, all the deities. None of them are known for obeying their rules. Even the ones that are, like, justice or law. First of all, the one that's in charge of law is de facto not above the law, but he can enforce it how he wants. And then the ones that are justice, that's a divine justice, not, like the justice system. That's why, like, justice is blind, Themis, I think, is the deity's name.
All right, but we're pretty much to the end of the family-friendly YouTube version. I'm hoping that we'll have time to continue on into the less family-friendly version, which will be on the podcast. I have to start remembering to mention that at the beginning, that we have the family-friendly version on YouTube, and we have the less than family-friendly version on podcast. The name is the same everywhere, Hyperborean Radio. Would you like to say anything on the way out? Are you going to have time to do a less than family-friendly version of this?
I think so. I think we can continue on. Yeah.
All right. So I'm hoping after this video, everybody goes and tunes into the more grown-up version with the of the show with the Dread Pirate McThunder. So, yeah, I'm just going to cut out and tell everybody, be strong. You're not alone. And do what you can to be the god that you was born to be. And I'm out, so then you guys can say goodbye, and we'll wrap this up.
Well, and I'll just encourage everybody to look into sea lore. I mean, read Treasure Island. Read 30 Leagues Under the Sea. I know those are fiction, but they're entertaining. You know, read old stories of Neptune, of Ron, of Manana MacLear. Look into pirates. Look into all these things, because there is so much lore out there. And especially if you have an interest in the sea or ocean life, I mean, how much more magical and fun is it when you feel the water at the beach just wash up your legs and you're like, it's just like Njordur. And with that, I'm going to sign out for this one.
I guess it's me now. So I'm just gonna say that it's been fun being on, and I've enjoyed this conversation we had talking about the sea and like everything associated with it, the ocean, even the freshwater. You know, a lot of good stuff talked about there. And yeah, the sea it's beautiful. It's one of the most mysterious, beautiful, mythical things you will ever encounter in this life, teeming with life, which upon which we live, traverse, discover new lands, bring new goods to different lands, and raise our sons on their shores. She's also a beautiful mistress, and she, by her loving you, she can see you through the night, but her spite can swallow you whole. And with that, McThunder out.